All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today. It's something you've probably encountered before, but you might not have a name for it. Thought-terminating cliches. Have you heard of these before?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They're everywhere.
They're these phrases, they seem pretty harmless on the surface, but they actually act as conversation stoppers. They often sound like common sense, even wisdom.
Yeah, like little bits of folk wisdom.
Yeah, like it is what it is, or everything happens for a reason.
Oh, yeah, those are classics.
Right. So what's the deal with these phrases? Why are they so good at shutting down critical thinking?
Well, I think part of it is that they sound so familiar. We've heard them all our lives, so we don't really stop to question them. But if you take a closer look, you realize they often oversimplify complex issues, and they can be used to dismiss other people's feelings and experiences.
It's true. It's like they offer a quick and easy answer, but they don't really invite any further discussion or exploration.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like a conversation trapdoor.
That's a great way to put it.
So to really understand how these cliches work, we need to go back to where the term originated. Robert J. Lifton,
Oh, yes, Lifton.
a psychiatrist who studied thought reform. He actually coined the phrase thought-terminating cliché in his book about totalitarianism.
That's right. It was in his book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism.
That's the one. And his work is really crucial here because he saw firsthand how these seemingly harmless phrases were used in oppressive regimes and cults
Oh, absolutely.
as a way to control people's thinking and prevent dissent.
Yeah, it's chilling when you think about it. These seemingly innocent sayings used as tools of control.
It really is. It's like suddenly boys will be boys takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Right. So let's talk about how these phrases actually function in everyday conversations to shut things down.
Okay, sure. Well, they can be categorized in a few different ways based on their tactics.
Interesting.
So one common tactic is dismissing emotions and experiences. Like if someone's upset about something and you say something like, it could be worse. Right.
Or time heals all wounds.
Oh, yeah.
Just hang in there.
You hear that one a lot.
All the
Yeah.
time. Right. And these phrases, they might sound comforting, but they often invalidate the other person's feelings.
Yeah, they're kind of brushing aside what the person's going through.
Exactly. And they discourage them from talking about what's bothering them.
And, it's not just about feeling heard, right? Sometimes talking about something can actually help us process it and move forward.
Absolutely. It's an essential part of healing and growth.
Right. So using these cliches can actually prevent that from happening.
Yeah, they're like a roadblock to deeper understanding and connection.
For sure. So dismissing emotions is one tactic. What are some other ways these phrases are used?
Well, another common one is shifting blame and responsibility. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
Okay, so think about phrases like, God has a plan, or life is unfair, or, my personal favorite, everything happens for a reason.
Oh, yeah, that one gets thrown around a lot. Right. And sometimes, these phrases can offer some comfort, I guess.
I can see that, yeah.
But they can also prevent people from taking responsibility for their actions
That's a good point.
and from looking for solutions to problems.
It's like giving up before you've even started.
Yeah, it's like surrendering to fate instead of taking control of your own life.
Right, it's like saying, it's not in my control, so why bother?
Exactly. And that can be incredibly disempowering.
Yeah, it takes away agency.
Exactly.
It's like we're giving these cliches the power to shape our reality.
And limit our possibilities.
Exactly. So we've got dismissing emotions, shifting blame. What other ways are these phrases used to shut down conversations?
Okay, well, another category we can look at is those that enforce conformity and obedience. Those cliches you hear in the workplace or even just in social groups.
Yeah, I think I get you.
Think of phrases like you're not being a team player.
Oh, I've definitely heard that one before.
Right. Or rules are rules.
It just is.
Yeah, that's the way things have always been done. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. They're all about maintaining the status quo.
Exactly.
No rocking the boat.
Yeah, they discourage critical thinking. They discourage individual expression.
Right. It's all about fitting in, not standing out.
Yep. And challenging the status quo is often seen as a threat.
Yeah, and these cliches kind of reinforce that.
They really do.
Interesting. Subscribing is the only way to keep the cows from learning TikTok dances? Oh my God.
The stakes have been raised.
I know, it's like we have to save the world.
Yeah, we have to protect the internet.
For from dancing cows.
From dancing cows.
I know.
That's a noble cause.
It is.
I think so.
So we've got cliches that dismiss emotions, cliches that shift blame, cliches that enforce conformity.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
There's one more big category we need to talk about, and that's cliches that shut down debate and critical analysis.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun one.
Yeah, these are the real conversation killers, you know?
I
The
bet.
ones that make you just want to throw your hands up and walk away.
So what are some examples of those?
Let's see. We'll have to agree to disagree. Which, okay, sometimes that's fine. But often it's just a way to avoid having a real conversation.
Sure.
And then you've got, that's just your opinion.
Ugh, that one is the worst.
It's so dismissive, right?
It's like they're saying your perspective doesn't even matter.
Exactly. Like it's not worth considering.
And it's all relative.
Yeah. Which, again, can be true in some contexts, but it's often used to just shut down any kind of moral or ethical discussion.
Totally. It's like saying there's no right or wrong.
Right.
Which just isn't true.
No.
So frustrating. These cliches, they're like little escape hatches to avoid actually engaging with the complexity of an issue.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
All right, so we know how these thought-terminating cliches operate. We've got a sense of their different tactics. But how can we actually spot them in the wild? What are some telltale signs?
All right, so here are some things to look out for. One of the biggest red flags is the emotional impact.
Okay.
Pay attention to how you feel when you hear certain phrases. Do you feel dismissed?
Right.
Do you feel shut down? Do you feel pressured to conform?
It's like a gut feel.
Yeah, exactly. If a phrase makes you feel like the conversation is suddenly over and you're not really being heard, then there's a good chance it might be a thought-terminating cliche.
So it's not just the words themselves, it's also the way they make you feel.
Absolutely.
Interesting. What else should we be looking out for?
Well, another giveaway is oversimplification. Like, is the phrase reducing a complex issue to a really simplistic statement?
Right, ignoring all the nuance.
Yeah, all the context.
So like if someone just throws out, life isn't fair, in response to a discussion about systemic inequality.
Exactly. That's classic thought-terminating cliche.
Gotcha. So pay attention to the emotional impact. Watch out for oversimplification. Any other tips for spotting these sneaky phrases?
One more. Listen for definitive language. Words like always, never, just. Those can often signal that the speaker is trying to close off alternative viewpoints.
So they're trying to end the conversation.
Yeah, they're drawing a line in the sand.
All right, so we've got our detective hats on. We're ready to spot these thought-terminating cliches.
Right.
But what do we do when we encounter them? Do we just call them out every time?
Well, that can be tricky. Sometimes directly challenging a cliche can actually backfire and make the other person more defensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to start an argument.
Right, so a gently approach can often be more effective.
Okay, so what are some alternative strategies?
Well, one technique is to just ask clarifying questions. Like if someone says, it is what it is, you could respond with something like, what aspects of the situation do you feel are unchangeable?
Oh, okay.
Or what makes you feel that way about this particular situation?
I see. So instead of contradicting them, you're prompting them to elaborate on their thinking.
Exactly. And maybe even reveal the assumptions behind the cliche.
Nice.
Yeah. Another approach is to reframe the conversation.
Okay, how do you do that?
So instead of getting caught up in the cliche itself, try to steer the conversation back to the underlying issues.
Right. Get to the heart of the matter.
Yes. Encourage a more nuanced discussion.
So, for example, if someone says, boys will be boys, to kind of excuse some harmful behavior,
Ugh, yeah. That one's tough.
you could reframe it by saying, do you think that phrase actually helps us understand what's happening here? Or does it just prevent us from having a more honest conversation?
Perfect. That's a great example.
Right.
Yeah, you're gently challenging the cliche and inviting the other person to think more critically.
And maybe open up the conversation a bit more.
Exactly. And remember, you always have the right to set boundaries. If the conversation just stays unproductive, you can politely explain why you feel the phrase is unhelpful and just disengage.
Curious about what shapes your beliefs?
That's a good one.
Dive into our free course at navigatingbeliefs.com.
So this one's really tapping into that natural curiosity we all have.
Yeah, like where did my beliefs even come from?
Right. We don't always stop to think about that.
maybe we should. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how to spot these cliches, how to respond to them. But is there a way to kind of go deeper, to get people to actually question the cliches themselves?
Right.
Like to dismantle the reasoning behind them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I think street epistemology could be a really useful tool here.
Oh, right. We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But can you remind us what it is exactly?
Sure. So street epistemology, it's basically a way to help people examine how they form their beliefs.
Okay.
And it often uses a non-confrontational kind of dialogue to encourage critical thinking.
So instead of telling someone they're wrong for using a cliche,
Yeah,
you try to understand how they came to believe that in the first place.
exactly. It's about asking questions, not making statements.
Interesting. So how would that work in practice?
Okay. Let's say someone says money is the root of all evil. A street epistemologist might respond with something like, "That's an interesting perspective. Can you walk me through how you came to that conclusion? Or what experiences or evidence led you to believe that?"
I see. So you're not challenging their belief directly. You're just kind of inviting them to explain their thinking.
Right. And often, just by having to articulate their reasoning, people start to see the flaws in their own logic.
Ah, that makes sense.
And another powerful tool in street epistemology is the use of confidence scales.
Confidence scales.
Yeah. So let's say someone says everything happens for a reason,
Right.
and they seem really certain about it. You could ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being completely uncertain and 10 being absolutely certain, how confident are you in that belief?
Oh, that's a clever way to kind of quantify their certainty.
Yeah. And sometimes, just by having to put a number on it, people start to realize that maybe they're not as sure as they thought they were.
That's really interesting.
And it can open up a space for a more nuanced conversation.
I like it. So how can our listeners start incorporating street epistemology into their own lives?
Well, the first step is to just cultivate a sense of genuine curiosity.
Okay.
Approach conversations with a desire to understand the other person's perspective, even if you disagree with them.
So it's about listening to learn, not to refute.
Exactly. And instead of offering counter-arguments, just ask questions like, what makes you say that? Or, can you help me understand your thinking on this?
Mm-hmm. So it's about shifting from a debate mindset
Yeah.
to a learning mindset.
Yes, exactly.
That's good advice.
And remember, it takes practice.
Of course.
Don't get discouraged if your first few attempts feel a little awkward. The more you do it, the more natural it will become.
That's true of anything, right?
Pretty much.
Well, I think this has been a really fascinating deep dive. We've learned a lot about thought-terminating cliches, how to spot them, how to respond to them, and even how to use street epistemology to challenge them.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
It has. And I think the key takeaway here is that we don't have to be passive recipients of these cliches. We can learn to think critically about them, and we can use them as opportunities to engage in more meaningful conversations.
Well said. And who knows, maybe we can even help other people break free from those limiting thought patterns.
Worth a shot. So, to our listeners out there, the next time you hear a phrase that feels like a conversation stopper, take a moment to pause, reflect, and maybe even ask a question instead.
Great advice.
You might be surprised by what you discover, and you might even spark a really interesting conversation.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, and we encourage you to keep those conversations flowing and those minds open.
Thanks for having me.
It was great having you.